Bob Costas, he was handling play-by-play duties alongside Ron Darling for the Yankees game. Yankees-Guardians on TBS, Game 2, tomorrow night in the Bronx. Bob also has HBO's Back on the Record with Bob Costas and works for MLB Network. Bob joining us now. Bob, how did it feel last night?
It felt great. It was a beautiful night at the ballpark. There was a tremendous atmosphere, even though the Yankees would appear to be kind of in a Goliath versus David situation. And despite the fact that the Guardians didn't do much on offense last night, they're a much different team over the last 6 weeks or so than they were during the course of the season. And with Terry Francona at the helm, they've always got a chance. So I think it's an interesting matchup. Meanwhile, I will say this with certainty. Neither I nor Jerry Jones will be the most noteworthy caller you have spoken with or attempted to speak with this morning.
I'm sorry that we had to bring you down to our depths of degradation here, Bob.
They say you should never follow kid acts or animal acts, and there's a third part of that of that trifecta now.
Man. And we had a caller yesterday saying that he knew a woman whose first name was Jenna and last name was Tolls. And so it took a little while for Fritzy to get it. So this is how it sounded yesterday.
I didn't catch the last name. He said Jenna Tolls. I didn't.
I think we got it. I guess you did catch it.
Jenna Tolls? Oh, okay.
So
that was yesterday, Bob. And then you have this. So this guy.
Dan, we're at relatively advanced ages, but there's still a callback to those adolescent times. Remember when they used to pass around an attendance sheet when you had a substitute teacher?
Yeah.
And then there would be 3 or 4 names that you'd write down on the attendance sheet, or at least the class clown in the back of the room would, hoping that the hapless substitute teacher would then call out that person's name, and the corresponding response would convulse every boy in the room and repulse every girl in the room.
Bend over.
Yeah, that's mild. Yes, but bend over is part of it, yes.
Did you ever get in trouble in school, like real trouble in school?
Yeah. Here's the story, since you want to hear it. I was a junior in high school. It was 1968, early 1969, and I lived down the street from an elementary school. And we used to go shoot baskets, on the playground of the elementary school, or toss baseballs around in the schoolyard. So we used that as kind of our playground, the kids that were roughly my age. And one Friday afternoon, not me, but one of our group, went into the school to get a drink of water from the fountain, and the gym teacher's door was open. Remember how every teacher, especially the gym teacher, had a ring of keys that had like 50 keys on it? You wondered what the heck it was. One of them must be to Fort Knox or something.
Yeah.
So this kid, whose name was Jerry, I will not further identify him, steals the ring of keys. Takes it, hey, look what I've got. Now, some in the group had nefarious ideas. My idea was, wait a minute. We'll keep the keys. They'll replace them. But what we'll do is we'll go into the gym on the weekends. It's wintertime. We don't want to shoot baskets in the snow. We'll go and we'll play in the gym, and we'll have our own little league, but we got to keep it a secret. So this went on for like 5-6 weeks. Every Saturday, Sunday, we're playing in the school gym. Seems really cool. We're playing full court, shirts and skins, the whole deal. But eventually, apparently, word got around. And one Sunday afternoon, I look up, and walking down the hallway is a uniformed policeman.
Okay.
And they go to round us up, and everybody sprints out the door. There's only like 8 of us, because we tried to keep it a tight group. Everybody sprints out the door and tries to escape. I somehow managed to escape, and I lived only, a block or 2 from the elementary school. So I get home, and I think I'm safe, until 2 squad cars pull up. Comac, Long Island was not a high crime area, so really this whole dragnet could focus on these miscreants playing basketball in the elementary school gym. And the next thing you know, I'm being walked out of my house by 2 cops, and the neighbors are out on the stoop. What could Bobby Costas have done? A fairly benign-looking 16-year-old. They take us down, all 8 of us, and they actually book us. And the cops are laughing like that. Hey, look at this kid here. He's a regular Bob Cousy. This guy's Marcus Haynes. So now we have to go to court, right? And when the judge sees what it is, and he's got other cases there, he's got grand larceny and everything, the judge sees what it is, and he says, this is really terrible. It's a real crime wave, blah, blah, blah. He's mocking the fact that we're in court, and he dismisses the charges. But we were suspended from school, and our parents had to come down and testify that we would never misbehave to this level again and never follow a life of crime. So that was the one time that I got in trouble. I was suspended for a week.
Yeah. So it's like those kids who meet the inmates and scared straight. Like, so you never went down that path again, Bob.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And we're all better for that. I mentioned this in the first hour with Bryce Harper. He's been on this stage since he was, 16 when he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And he's had 2 MVPs. He's won 2 World Series titles. And I said, I think he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Now, it's a dangerous game to play when you go, he's not even 30 yet, but it feels like he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Where do you stand with Bryce Harper, where he is right now?
Yeah, he's got time to build on his resume, but it's pointed in that direction. And there's so many different ways you can interpret what a Hall of Famer is. Roger Maris won 2 MVPs back-to-back, played on 7 pennant winners, and what happened with Judge this year proves yet again how Roger Maris's name resonates throughout baseball history. He's a more significant historic figure than most of the players in the Hall of Fame. Not necessarily a better player, but you can make a case for him. You can make a really good case for Keith Hernandez or Steve Garvey, whose power numbers don't match up with what we expect of a first baseman these days, but in the context of their time, they were more impactful than a lot of guys whose OPS may be higher in the context of the 21st century. Dale Murphy won back-to-back MVPs and for a while was regarded as one of the 2 or 3 best players in the game, as was Don Mattingly. Dave Parker was a better player than a lot of guys who were in the Hall of Fame. So a lot of it depends upon how the voters are interpreting it. If they're going strictly on the basis of analytics, what's this guy's WAR or whatever, then perhaps it's more cut and dry. But some people view it, as I do, as a combination of what the statistics are and some subjective but at least informed understanding of what their place in history was and what their impact was against their contemporaries.
We're talking to Bob Costas. He'll be with Ron Darling and the ALDS between the Guardians and Yankees on TBS. Game 2 tomorrow night in the Bronx at 7:30 Eastern. Are we past the anti-Astro sentiment?
No, I think some of it lingers. If they were to meet the Dodgers, for example, in the World Series, the Dodger fan base still feels as if they were jobbed in 2017 in the World Series. So I think they would hear it. A lot of Yankee fans still resent the Astros, and they could be on a collision course in the LCS. So you could have 2 prime examples, LCS against the Yankees and possibly World Series against the Dodgers. I think it's calmed down overall, but it hasn't disappeared, and in some places the fires still rage.
What's the one piece of sports memorabilia that you wish you would have held on to or you had the opportunity to get?
You know, you asked me this once before, Dan, and I've never really been a collector, and I never really wanted to impose on people, but I was lucky enough because of my connection to baseball to interview and in some cases become friends with the real bold-faced names of our childhood. Mays, Aaron, Mantle, even before my childhood, DiMaggio, Williams. And I never really asked them for much of anything. I have a few signed baseballs, which I gave to my son, Keith, who now works for the Baseball Network and was a real baseball fan even as a little kid. So I've got signed baseballs from all the guys I just mentioned and a few others, but I didn't really go out of my way to get anything else, and I never really looked at it as having any other value except sentimental, never any commercial value.
Because I talked to Doc Emmerich, and Doc would keep all of his boards, when he would do a play-by-play, all of his notes. And I was curious, do you keep all of your scorecards or boards that you have for the games that you've done?
Yeah, I keep them for a while if it's still relevant 2 years, 3 years later, if there are notes on players that are still involved. And then after that, I get rid of them, except I keep the ones that are most significant. I keep the ones from like the seventh game of the World Series. I kept the one from Steven Strasburg's debut when he struck out 14 for the Nationals and he was briefly a sensation around baseball. Moments like that, Derek Jeter's last game at Yankee Stadium, moments like that, I've kept the scorecards.
Could the Dodgers be historically great if they win it all this year?
Yeah, they won 111 games this year. Their run differential was something like plus 340. The Yankees led the American League, and it was way behind that differential that the Dodgers had. And they've been such a good team, even though they only won the one World Championship in 2020. They've been a World Championship caliber team for so long. So if you take kind of this whole better part of a decade under Dave Roberts, if you look at it that way, they deserve consideration as an all-time great team.
I brought this up to a couple of guys who covered the game. See what your thought is. If you can have the career of Ken Griffey Jr. or Albert Pujols.
You know, I'm kind of dodging it. You wouldn't want a baseball world without either one of them. You know, Ken Griffey Jr. became what he should have become. He was the one and only Ken Griffey Jr. And Pujols was the one and only El Hombre, or the Machine. Griffey was the greater all-round player because he was a spectacular center fielder. Pujols has the greater statistics as a hitter. They're both obvious first-ballot Hall of Famers. Griffey was near unanimous. That barrier has been broken now by Rivera getting all the votes and Jeter missing by only one, so Pujols might be unanimous in 5 years when he comes up. I guess if you're just talking about a kid's dreams, I think a kid would dream of playing center field like Willie Mays or like Ken Griffey Jr., more than he would dream of being a first baseman or a designated hitter, which is not a knock on Pujols. So if you're talking about a 10-year-old kid who could be Ken Griffey Jr. or Albert Pujols, probably more of those 10-year-old kids would choose Griffey.
If you were Shohei Otani's agent, what would you do?
I would wait for Artie Moreno to sell the team and then walk in to the office of whoever purchased it and said, I'd like you to meet Shohei Otani, your new partner and part owner of your team. And if you're not good with that, there are 29 other teams that are very much interested. Have a nice day.
Can I pay him for playing two positions? Like, could he be a $60 million player if I give him 40 as a hitter and 20 as a pitcher, or split it 30-30? I mean, he can be an all-star at either, but can he command two salaries?
Not quite, but he can command more than what a single superstar's salary would command for either being an all-star hitter or a Cy Young contending pitcher. Plus, you got to factor in the gate attraction and his value to a multicultural fan base as well. And his commercial value beyond whatever his one team is. He has tremendous commercial value to the sport. You can't compare anyone to Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan had value to the NBA, obviously, beyond the Chicago Bulls. Shohei Otani is not at that level. No baseball player, even Aaron Judge this year, is at that level. It's harder to get the superstars of the game onto the biggest stages in baseball, as witness the fact that Ken Griffey Jr., who we just mentioned, never played in a World Series. So I'm not comparing Otani to Jordan at that level, but it's the same kind of idea. There's a handful of baseball players who are really important to the sport overall, not just to their teams. Otani is one, Judge is another.
I'll leave you with this. We embrace the almost mythology behind Bo Jackson, but we don't do that with Deion Sanders. Why is that?
Well, because what Bo did in baseball, I think, was easier to grasp. You look at Bo's highlights in baseball, not that there were that many of them, but enough to remember: 500-foot home runs, scaling the wall like Spider-Man, the throw that got Harold Reynolds at the plate, and Harold still can't believe that he was somehow thrown out on that play. He just seemed to be, if he had fulfilled his potential, he seemed to have been capable of being a Hall of Famer in both football and baseball. I don't think anyone ever said that Deion Sanders was likely to be a baseball Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I feel that way, but it's almost like Bo's legend has grown.
Yeah.
It just and I remember experiencing it and watching him in football and baseball, and it felt like he could have been an All-Star, maybe a Hall of Famer in either one of those, but he wasn't. Whereas Deion is a Hall of Famer in football and, had a pretty solid baseball career.
Oh, yeah, he would have been, if he just played baseball, a very good baseball player. Likely would have been an all-star some seasons. He's arguably the greatest defensive back ever, certainly on the short list there. But there was something about Bo that just seemed bigger. And what might have been is always a compelling narrative, not just in sports, but outside sports. The person whose career, or even in some cases life, is cut short, there's an element that adds to the mythology.
Yeah.
So Bo has that going for him, and luckily he's still drawing breath, so he didn't have to take the second route.
Yeah, this happens with, musicians or artists when they die early.
Sure.
What does 62 home runs mean to you?
I think it means what it means to most reasonable, fair-minded baseball fans. It feels legitimate. It feels authentic. We can speak euphemistically and say it's the Yankee record, it's the American League record, but it's the record for all of baseball history outside of the late 90s and early 2000s. From 98 to 2000, in 4 seasons, 3 guys combined to have 6 seasons of more than 62 home runs. Whereas in the entire history of the game, apart from that, now more than a century since the advent of the lively ball, 3 guys have done it, and barely so, at 60, 61, and 62. And as I said on the broadcast last night, not taking pot shots at anyone else, there's no need to demonize Barry Bonds, who on his natural merits was one of the greatest players who ever played in any era. Mark McGwire's a good guy. Sammy Sosa brought joy to Wrigleyville. That isn't the point. But if you look at the home runs per time at bat, Judge, Ruth, Maris are roughly in the same range of a home run once every 9 to 10 times at bat. If you look at McGwire and Bonds, not so much Sosa, but McGwire and Bonds, they distorted those figures to the point where it became a video game. And when people try to compare them to other generations, well, Ruth played against segregated competition. Yes, that's true, but what does any of this have to do with Babe Ruth? Hank Aaron held the career record. Roger Maris, who played in the 50s and 60s, held the single-season record. The real tell is to compare any of those guys to themselves, because all 3 of them had established lengthy statistical histories before they began taking steroids and other PEDs. And they exceeded their already established past levels, not by small amounts, but exponentially. And that tells you all you need to know. It doesn't mean they're bad guys. It does mean that what they did goes into a different category in the minds of most reasonable, well-informed people.
Great to talk to you as always. And Bob will be on the call Game 2 tomorrow with Ron Darling on TBS. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Okay, take care.
All right.
Bye.
That'll be at 7:30 Eastern, TBS, the exclusive home of the ALDS and ALCS.